The blazing sun poured over the savannah, turning the grasses into waves of gold. But beneath that beauty, tragedy was already unfolding. A lost lion cub lay trapped in the crushing coils of a massive python. And there was David, a ranger, watching in silent torment, his instincts pulling him to intervene, but the brutal laws of nature holding him back. Yet, the real shock wasn't the desperate struggle between predator and prey. It was the arrival of an unlikely figure, someone no one could have expected, someone about to change everything. The heat shimmered across the land, stretching over acacia trees that stood like lonely sentinels. The wind carried the scent of dust and life, but also something heavier, an unspoken warning of danger. David drove slowly across the dirt road, his Jeep's wheels rumbling softly, his sun-worn face calm, his sharp eyes scanning every corner. And then he froze. Through his binoculars, the sight stole his breath. A tiny lion cub, far from its pride, was wrapped in the living chains of an African rock python. The snake's coils squeezed tighter with every faint breath the cub fought to take. The helpless little body lay still, caught in death's grip. David's chest ached. His hands tightened around his tranquilizer gun, but hesitation rooted him. One wrong move could seal the cub's fate. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had seen so many deaths here, knew too well how often human interference made things worse. His heart screamed to save it, but his ranger's discipline warned him to hold still. And in that terrible pause, the grass shifted. A shadow moved. Out stepped a hyena. David frowned. Hyenas rarely interfered. They waited. They scavenged. They thrived in the aftermath. But this one was different. Its gaze locked onto the cub and the python, not with hunger, but with something strange. Something heavy. Concern. And then, without warning, it lunged. The hyena snarled, sank its teeth into the python's thick, armored body, and pulled with desperate force. It bit again and again, gnawing at the tail, straining against the coils. David held his breath, stunned. Could it be? A hyena, one of nature's fiercest rivals of lions, risking its life to save a cub? Centuries of bloodlines and battles between them, and now this, an enemy becoming a savior. But the python was merciless, its strength unmatched, the air filled with the dry, chilling crunch of bones. The cub's body quivered, then went still. Its golden eyes closed forever. The sun blazed overhead, illuminating the heartbreak. The python tightened around its prize, a victor of death, coiling into a shield. The hyena staggered back, panting. But its eyes told the story, dark, heavy, not of hunger denied, but of sorrow. Not the anger of a predator losing a meal, but the grief of a creature watching a fragile life disappear. David stared. Could it be that animals carried feelings far deeper than we ever gave them credit for? Why else would this hyena linger, resisting instinct, staring with such raw helplessness? And then, as the silence stretched, the hyena did the unthinkable. It stepped forward again. Its jaws clamped onto the lifeless cub, and the python still wrapped around it. With staggering effort, it lifted the weight, a burden twice its own size. David nearly dropped his binoculars. The hyena didn't eat. It didn't abandon. It carried. Through the grasses, step after grueling step, it bore the cub's body, its movements slow but deliberate. In all his years, David had seen strange wonders, but never this. A hyena carrying its sworn enemy, not for hunger, but as if bound to a ritual older than man's understanding. What force was guiding it? Under the relentless sun, the hyena pressed on, through bushes, across dry stream beds, never wavering, never hesitating. Each step was heavy, but filled with purpose. David followed, silent, his heart pounding with awe. He wasn't just watching survival. He was witnessing a story beyond explanation. A story the wild had never told him before. This sight shattered everything David thought he knew about hyenas, their ferocity, their greed, their opportunism. Something far deeper was happening here, something human language could barely capture. His curiosity about where this journey would end grew heavier with every step the hyena took. Can you imagine a moment when ancient rivalries simply dissolve, replaced by a silence so profound it speaks louder than any roar? As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the savannah, David's eyes caught something on the horizon, a raised mound along a narrow dirt road. And there, emerging from the tall grass, stood the pride. Two males, two lionesses, their bodies tense, their eyes sharp, ready to unleash fury at any second. The air was thick with the unmistakable scent of lions, the very rulers of this land. For a lone hyena to walk into their territory carrying one of their cubs, this was unthinkable. An insult that could only end in blood. David's chest tightened as he braced for chaos. But the hyena did not run. It did not bare its teeth. Instead, it slowed, and in a gesture that defied every instinct of its kind, it gently laid the cub on the dusty path before the lions, then stepped back. Its head lowered, a surrender so pure, so deliberate, it left David breathless. The python was still coiled around the lifeless cub, hissing weakly, too drained to fight. Yet the silence that fell was unlike anything David had ever heard. No roars, no growls. Only a heavy stillness that carried the weight of grief. In that moment, the hatred between predator and rival vanished. What remained was sorrow. Shared sorrow. The hyena must have recognized this pride sent from miles away. It had carried the cub not for conquest, not for hunger, but to return it home. The wind swept over the savannah, and with it came a feeling that instinct alone could not explain. Respect. Mourning. A fragile unity that only death could forge. David's spine tingled. Every law of the wild he'd ever studied seemed to unravel before his eyes. The lions did not strike. They stood over their cub, their grief clear, their acceptance heavy. The lioness's gaze burned with pain, and yet, within the hyena's dark eyes, David saw something just as haunting. Understanding. In that shared look, no dominance existed, no hunger, no rivalry. Only loss. Only a strange reverence for life cut short. It was as if the wild itself whispered a truth humans often forget, that beneath the surface of conflict, there can be connection. That even sworn enemies can bow to something greater than themselves. David lowered his binoculars, his heart hammering. He realized he was not just watching survival. He was witnessing a messenger. A creature branded as cruel and cowardly had just crossed the invisible boundaries of instinct to deliver what was sacred, returning a lost child to its grieving family. The hyena had nothing to gain. No meal, no victory. Yet it chose this path, a burden carried not for itself, but for another. It could not save the cub's life, but it brought something else. A strange peace, an act of unity no one could have imagined. This moment, under the blazing African sun, was more than a glimpse of nature's complexity. It was a reflection of us, of how quickly we judge, how easily we place labels, enemy, coward, rival, without ever seeing the full story. Just as we condemn the hyena, we often condemn one another. Different cultures, opposing beliefs, unfamiliar faces. But here, in this raw display of grief and respect, was a lesson humans so often forget, that behind every being lies a story we cannot see, a depth we rarely imagine. Maybe love and hate, life and death, are not divided by such simple lines. Maybe, sometimes, instinct itself can be overcome by something higher, compassion, respect, and the quiet recognition of shared pain. The hyena did not devour. It did not abandon. It returned. And in that act, it reminded even the fiercest predators of a truth beyond survival. The story of the hyena, the lions, and the python was not just about nature. It was a mirror. A reminder that even in the most brutal corners of existence, there are flickers of unity, of compassion, of connection that cannot be explained, only felt. And perhaps that's the greatest wonder of the wild, that in its darkest tragedies, it still leaves us with moments that reshape the way we see everything. Moments we will never fully understand, but never forget.